Please join me in welcoming to the stage Reddit CEO Steve Huffman. Okay, right there. All right, we're gonna get right to it. The advertising is a big part of what drove your results. It's a big part of what you do. And I want to start by getting your insights into, you talked about two things. One was the investments in advertising. There's also just the health of the market. When you think about what really drove the results, those high click-through rates and so many other things, it just, you should listen to the investor call. Where do you see, was it about the investments and the ways you tweaked the tools, or was it about the health? What's the balance between those two things?
We're seeing a lot of things actually come together right now. I'm very appreciative of the timing that everything came together. But first we grew users. So users grew 37% year over year. Users are inventory. And our users are spread across the platform, across communities that represent their passions and interests. But I think one of the things that isn't always obvious at first with Reddit is how inherently commercial a lot of Reddit is. So just more users is the first thing. And then ad tech, right? We've just been grinding away, making our ad platform work better for our customers. And then finally, a little help from the market. I think things are starting to look up where our biggest category for years has been technology. And for the last 2 years, it was kind of flat, maybe even down. Now, the good news is during that time, we grew in pretty much every other category, but we're seeing tech come back now as well. And so marketers are marketing, and so that helps as well. So I think a lot of things pointing in the right direction right now.
Do you anticipate continuing to invest in getting the ad technology right at the same pace as before? And the second part of that question is, looking at the advertising market, the health of the market, digital advertising in the second half, do you expect that to improve or stay kind of where it is right now?
So for ad tech, I mean, the same pace or better, I hope. I think that's been the story for our company over the last couple of years, is just really a focus on execution, right? Just doing better work, shipping on time, high quality. And I think we've made nice, steady improvement there, and I'd like to see that continue. But I think the results, we can see the results of our effort, and so that feels great. As for the ads market, it's better now than it was over the last couple of years. I'd say it's still volatile, and we still lack some visibility. I think we all do. So I'll say we're cautiously optimistic. But look, we also spent the last 2 years learning how to run this business in choppy conditions. So if things get choppy again, that's okay. But obviously, we'd love to see the momentum continue.
Before we talk about, you made an announcement today, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. I'd like to pull up the poll, and I'm going to make it work this time. And the question is, what's the Reddit business that provides the greatest long-term growth potential in your view? And there should be 3 up there. One of them is AI licensing deals. 2, the advertising business, right, which makes up most of their business now. And thirdly, which I hope we can talk about later, is the user economy and the kinds of user-to-user transactions and other things along those lines. So we'll watch those results come in. All right, today you announced a new public content policy related to those AI deals that you're striking. Short summary of what that is and what made it clear that you needed to set these parameters.
Sure. So this morning we announced what we call the public content policy, which is it's a new policy that sits alongside what a lot of websites have, the privacy policy. So our privacy policy basically says, here's what information on Reddit is private and what we do with it. So behavioral data, what you're browsing, where you spend time. And our privacy policy is pretty short. We don't sell it. We don't license it. It doesn't go anywhere. It's sacred. Now, the public content on Reddit. So most of the content that you see, Reddit is inherently a public platform. Now, the situation that we're in today is different from where we were a year ago, a couple of years ago. And so I looked at it as we have kind of 3 paths we could take. The first path would be the status quo. We just stay open and permissive. I think in the past that worked okay. We'd be crawled by Google and others, maybe researchers. Generally, in our view, it made the ecosystem better and healthier. But what's happening now is we're being crawled every which way by commercial entities, by foreign nation states, for who knows what. And so I don't think the status quo is an acceptable option. But then the other option would be, okay, we just shut our doors, which is what literally everybody else has done. Everybody else has shut off. But we believe in the open internet. We like that Reddit content is out there. We like showing up in search. We like that users can find us this way. We love supporting research. We love Internet Archive and things like that. So I think closing off was not the right option either. So now where we are is somewhere in the middle. We want to stay open, but we need to do so on terms that are respectful of our users, of their privacy, that are respectful of our business. And so that's basically what we put out there. Is we said, we're open for business, we'll do commercial agreements, we'll do non-commercial agreements for nonprofits and things like that, we'll support research. But if you're going to crawl Reddit data, you can't, for example, reverse engineer our users' privacy, or excuse me, their identities. Or can't use our data to target them or things like that. There's some guardrails. You need to delete if they delete it off of Reddit, we want you to delete it out of your systems. And so putting some guardrails on how our public data is used is what we're doing.
I want to stay on AI licensing for just a minute more. Around the time of the IPO, there was a lot of conversation, and dare I say even maybe a little bit of hype about the role that these kinds of licensing deals could play in your business going forward. I got the sense, listening to your earnings the other day, that there was a bit less of an emphasis on that. Was that deliberate, first? And second, I want to hear from you how sort of sustainable and predictable you expect that business to be going forward. One analyst said his base case was that eventually this licensing revenue could reach as much as 1/3 of total revenue by 2027. Is that anywhere in the ballpark?
So we are being picky about who we work with. So I just talked about the public content policy. I think that means not every partner is a good fit for Reddit. Our data is extremely valuable. That we're seeing. We're seeing a ton of interest in it. Our data is the content is extremely valuable to us. I think there's all sorts of interesting things we can build with it. Where the data licensing business goes, I think it remains to be seen. Look, it's kind of a new business. We're literally creating this market at the scale that we're at, and so I think there's some really interesting opportunities. We'll do some of these bigger deals, like the one we announced with Google. We'll do smaller deals with like financial institutions, social listening services, things like that, and I'm sure a bunch of things in between. But I think it's hard to put a number on where we think it can go because it's changing and evolving before our eyes.
Is that base case of 1/3, does that seem like out of the realm of possibility?
It is hard to compete with ads. So I saw that poll. It would look like user economy was winning, which would be very exciting. Facebook did $170 billion in ads last year. From a company that's, call it we're a billion run rate, that may as well be infinite. So if we can get to 1/3 of ads, that would be incredible, but ads is just such a powerful, scalable business model. Yeah. That's the one to beat.
You said around the time of your IPO that the FTC is asking questions about the relationship between big tech companies and suppliers of data like yourself. Realize it's early days, but when you think about the pantheon of things that Lina Khan and her team could and should be concerned about, does she have a point? Is there valid concern about the role that these types of relationships can be playing?
I mean, I think it's natural for they and other regulators and lawmakers to ask questions, right? It's a new space, it's an interesting space. There's obviously a lot of conversation and attention on it. What I want they and others to know is that I think there's a middle ground, right? I think the internet has benefited and consumers have benefited tremendously from, for example, Reddit being well indexed into like Google search index, right? That sort of thing. And I think of AI as kind of the next evolution of that sort of relationship. So I think that sort of thing can be really powerful. But at the same time, there are players in the space who I think aren't behaving well, who are using our data in ways that we wouldn't like, that our users wouldn't like. And so I think, in conversations like that, one of our goals is to basically educate them. And here's the good behavior we're seeing, here's the bad behavior we're seeing, here's how we think about user protection. And by the way, that's any conversation we have with regulators and lawmakers. That's kind of the point of view we bring, we're pro-technology, pro-progress, but also we try to be, we live by the golden rule, right? We wouldn't want to see things done in a nefarious or malicious way with our content or anybody else's.
Who's breaking the golden rule?
I'm not ready to say that yet.
We'll get you back on stage, Steve, when you're ready to start sharing some of that. You talked about the opportunities to improve user interface on search, doing a better job of monetizing ads on search. You also talked to my colleagues on Bloomberg TV and talked about the appetite for mergers and acquisitions. What areas are ripe for, what areas are interesting to you? And specifically, is there technology out there around search that can be bought versus built?
I think potentially. Look, our first priority is to invest in our own business. And we've got a lot to build, and we've been making those investments. But we've done some acquisitions, about half a dozen over the last couple of years. They've all been very similar, these like small to medium sized, kind of like tech and teams. So maybe a dozen employees. That's been kind of our sweet spot. We haven't done anything huge. But they've been really helpful to us in just advancing our abilities, particularly in AI.
Yep.
And so that's still the first place we look. As we kind of develop that muscle, I think M&A is difficult. It can obviously be hugely beneficial, but we've also seen companies, maybe get too excited. So, plan A is we build, and plan B is we buy here and there if we can supplement, our skills and abilities.
Is search an area where you think mergers would make sense?
Yes,
or is that a build first?
It's both, to be honest with you. So I almost use search and AI interchangeably from a product point of view. And so we're building as best as we can. But if we can leap forward, of course we'll take that opportunity.
I want to talk about international translations. You talked a bit about that. French is your first foreign language. And then you identified Spanish next, which makes a lot of sense. What about after that? What is the roadmap calling for?
Well, so French first, the test is going very well. So what we're doing here is we're using large language models to translate the entire Reddit corpus. So 2 decades of conversation about anything and everything, we can very quickly translate into other language at human quality translation, which is super exciting. It's literally fulfilling the promise of the internet, right? Connecting people around the world regardless of what language they speak. French test is going great. Spanish, obvious next step. There's like 1 billion Spanish speakers. So that would just be, I think, a huge opportunity for us to grow outside of English, outside of America, much faster than it might otherwise happen. And then from there, we'll go through more languages. There's some stuff that I'm even excited about. So you've got, just more languages that are spoken around the world. But I also would love to get to things, for example, like simple English, right? Just take English but make it simple. Or maybe like kid-friendly English. And so I think there's like things like that where we have the capability now of presenting Reddit in different ways that I think could be like really interesting.
So it might be able to help me talk to my kids who are, in their 20s.
Yeah, teenager English. So,
but foreign languages, give us some color on what comes next.
We're basically going to chip through these languages. So French is our test, Spanish is the big one, and then we just want coverage as much as we can do all over the globe. The other thing that we get that I think is very exciting, and this is not just for us, I think this is for any platform, is the ability to do safety and moderation in other languages and other cultures. I think one of the most exciting things that large language models unlock for everybody is safety. And so I expect the internet will be a safer place in a few years as a result of this technology. Which brings it all the way back to why I want Reddit to be accessible for training.
Right.
Because it unlocks these technologies that I think can just be, for their own sake, good and helpful.
Your revenue breakdown is about 50% US, 50% outside the US. Your peer group, it's closer to 80 to 90% outside of the US, if I'm reading that right. How long do you take to get, is parity where you think you need to be, and how long does it take to get there?
Well, I think it's a matter of time. So yes, our traffic is about 50% US, non-US, as you mentioned. Most of our peers, 80 to 90%, sometimes 90+% outside the US. So I think naturally we float up to that scale, but it's a question of on what timeline. And so if we can do it faster, for example, with translation, I think that'd be amazing. And so that's our aim. And we'll just keep pushing that way. The thing is, Reddit is a community platform, and so it is real people in real communities. So we do have to be considered that you can't just create a community, right? You can't just will a community into existence. We have to be thoughtful and have I think a steady hand there. But I think we can do it faster, right? I mean, we've been around 19 years in the US. I'd like to do it a little faster outside the US.
In the last couple seconds, our audience is very optimistic about the prospects for the user economy. As you move into that area, how long, one question, how long before we start to see some product rollouts? And two, what are you going to do to ensure that those kinds of transaction interactions don't become scammy, exploitive, the kinds of things that we've seen on some other platforms?
Sure. So we'll see some product stuff coming out very soon, within the next couple of months. So we've got a new version of awards. If you use Reddit, we had awards, and then we shut them off. Now they're coming back, better than ever, I hope, I'm sure. So that sort of thing will start getting the ball rolling again, which I'm very excited about, and we'll just keep iterating on the product from there. And the thing about, let's call it bad behavior or things like that, Reddit, because of the voting system, right, it's ultimately nothing becomes popular on Reddit unless a community of like-minded people vote up and make it popular. We're more naturally protected from those sorts of scammy behaviors. More than likely, if you're on Reddit just trying to make a buck, you'll get downvoted. Now, if the content's great, well, then you should do well. And that's kind of the whole idea. But I think Reddit's really good at finding the good content from a sea of noise.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for, but thank you so much, Steve, for joining me here on stage.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.